السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
اللهم رب هذه الجماعة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا وسيلته
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهديه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وقال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. We begin with the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, the all-knowing, the all-seeing, the most with wisdom. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send His blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and upon those that follow his way until the end of times. Amin wa bi'alameen. This khutbah, insha'Allah, will be a reflection upon the times that we go on as a reflection of this new year. So in 2023, when we go into a new year, there's usually resolutions. And as Muslims, as believers, we take every moment in life with a reflection. Right? Whatever happens in this world is a manifested reality of the divine reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And you take this opportunity to see what it means to have, for example, New Year, New Me, what it means to have a reflection upon New Year and so forth, and a reflection upon what the meaning of being new is in itself, right? It begs the question for us to really ask ourselves, what are we? Right? What are we as Muslims? What are we as existing beings? What are we in the grand scheme of things? We look to ourselves that, the reality of this world is that this world will come to an end. We have 50, 60 years, 70 years. MashaAllah, for those that are living beyond those years, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us long years full of blessings and barakah. But we ask ourselves, what is the origin of this? Right? How do we look to ourselves? We see in the Quranic narrative, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He brings forth all the souls of the children of Adam. Right? All of us come along in the divine plane, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alastu bi rabbikum, that I may not be your Lord. And we say, the souls say, Bala shahidna, and indeed, we testify towards that. Bala shahidna an taqulu yawm al-qiyamah inna kunna an hadha ghafilin. That, this is something that perhaps we really might forget about. Right? This is something that perhaps that we need a reminder towards. Right? Because every moment in life, as a Muslim, it reminds us, and it's something really interesting, because as reminders we listen, it's something of a reminder where that we know of it already. Right? To be reminded of is that we know of it already. We didn't know it before. And the idea of being reminded is that we know this truth. We know this reality of being souls called upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's the essence of life. The essence of life here is that we say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, that indeed we belong to Allah, that we are Allah's, and indeed we shall return. That idea is not just for us, for those that are going back 6 feet deep, going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but for us living. Right? That quote-unquote mantra is for us to recognize and to reorient with the taqwa that we should have. This God consciousness that this world is nothing without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? All of this is through the source of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the reorientation that we want with every year coming, with every moment coming. Right. So, in terms of looking to see the reflections that we have, we start with a starting point. Right? Every new year, we don't want a new year to be something that we're stagnant with. Right? Imam Shafi'i, he says, a scholar of one of the schools of thought in the Islamic tradition, he talks about water that is stagnant versus water that is running. Insala talaba wa innam yasil lam yatibi. The idea that water that is stagnant is that it's not moving. That, animals aren't there, the water may be corrupted, may be poisonous, but then we have flowing water, it's coming from a source, and it's alive. Right? And we need to be alive. We can't be stagnant in the ways that we are in terms of moving day by day. Right? Just going through the motions. Right? We need to be more than that in terms of realizing who we are and what is our potential in terms of moving in this world. Right? Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Right? He says, do not be like those who forgot Allah, and so He made them forget themselves. It is they who are truly rebellious. Right? So the idea of forgetting Allah is that there is something of that origin that we talked about that goes back to the source of all things. Right? As we talked about how death itself is not just the end of all things, but the beginning of another reality and coming towards the divine presence, the Hadrah, the divine presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This idea here is that before, when we were souls, and we are still souls, our essence is not this body, it's part of the essence. But our essence is part of the mind, the body, and the soul, which will bring us towards the hereafter. And so, this death that comes to every single soul is not the end, but it's the beginning. Many scholars call it as the veil that is being removed. Because in this world, we don't see Allah. We don't see the unseen world. Right? Alim al-ghayb. We don't see the unseen world. But with the unveiling of what comes in the next 60, 70 years of our lives, it comes towards a connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with what is truly real. Right? And so when we remove the picture of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from our lives, we become husk. We become empty. Right? There's nothing that is fulfilling. When we look for contentment, when we look towards the pursuit of happiness, we can always look towards the world. But we have to get back and to take that dose of reality of what the world truly is. Is the world a place of happiness, of enjoyment? Because this world, you're not going to get everything. Right? That's the reality of things. We can get things in life, we can get joy, but there's also grief, there's also sadness. People got issues. Right? We all have issues. Right? And we relegate our issues towards other substitutes that we have in this world. Through enjoyment, through leisure. But one of the ways to really relegate all of this is to relegate all of that towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To realize that that is the source. That Allah is the source. Right? There was a reflection here about the New Year's in terms of what C.S. Lewis says, as a writer of The Language and the Wardrobe. He says, relying on God has to begin all over again every day as if nothing had yet been done. There's also a quote by a sagacious scholar of Alexandrian descent in Egypt, Ibn At-Thohir al-Sikandari. He says, in alamat al-najh fi nihayat al-ruju' ila Allah fi al-bidayat. That of the signs of success towards the end of someone's life is to return to Allah, to return to the divine presence in the very beginning. Right? And so we ask ourselves the question, how are we starting this day? How are we starting this year? Right? How are we starting every day? How are we starting every moment? Because if we're forgetting Allah, then we're reminded of something else. If we're not remembering Allah, then we're remembering other things. Okay. And that's the core of it. To always be in the presence and the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. There are three things that we can reflect on, inshallah, in terms of how we can go about this. How we can go in terms of seeing what makes it different from this year towards the previous year, towards the next year. There are three kind of tools that we can remind ourselves of, inshallah. The first is to have this tool of, in the Arabic or in the Islamic tradition, it's called as muraqabah. Right? This overwatching word. The self-awareness. Muraqabah comes to the understanding that we are self-aware of what we do. Right? We are self-aware of what are we doing. How are we? Right? It's not the question of what are we doing in life, but how are we doing in life. Right? It's not about the behavior, but as well, how are we being. Right? The question of not about doing, but how our states are, how our being is. And that's something that we need to really take into account in terms of how we react to things, how we deal with people, how we deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we see knee-jerk reactions, people get mad, people get very reactive. How are we with our self-restraint? How are we with our self-control? How are we with our patience? How are we with dealing with this world? Are we in bitter spites of this world? Are we saying, why is this happening to me? Why did God do this to me? We have to really look into ourselves and see and ask our hearts, how are we doing? And not just how are we doing, but how are we being? Right? There's a teacher that asks, rather than asking, how are you? But rather he says, how is your heart doing? Right? I can always say, Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well, so on and so forth, but how is my heart doing? Right? That's the question that we ask ourselves. How is my heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How is my heart when I deal with others? How is my heart when I deal with my parents? How is my heart when I deal with my siblings? How is my heart when I deal with the community? Is it tranquil? Is it calm when I meet people, when I see the person next to me on my right, on my left? Or is there a sense of bitterness, of rancor? Right? And so these are heartful questions that we need to ask ourselves in terms of moving forward in this year, inshallah. The idea of muraqabah, which means to have self-awareness, to overwatch what we do. There's even muraqabah itself, Umar, the Caliph, Umar radiallahu anhu, Allah be pleased with him, the Prophet ﷺ, he had a list of hypocrites at that time. And Umar, he himself was one of the main companions of the Prophet ﷺ. We know that he's of a high status in Islam and a high status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he himself, he wasn't safe with his situation. He wasn't safe with his status. He was always asking, how is my heart? Because when he knew of the Prophet ﷺ having this list of names of hypocrites, he asked Umar, is my name on that list? Is my name on that list? Right? And that begs the question for us, if Umar himself, the one who was, 180 from being antagonistic towards the prophetic message, towards the Prophet ﷺ, towards being a big supporter of the Prophet ﷺ, how are we in our states? How are we in our conditions when we ask that question? Am I on this? Right? Am I truly being hopefully Muslim? Am I truly feeling hopefully a believer? Hopefully in saying the Shahada, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, that I bear witness that there's nothing except Allah. And that way towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? The second tool after muraqabah is muhasabah. Muhasabah itself means to take account. When you think about accounting, when you think about when you have to pay your taxes, everyone's very, very precise, right? How much did I pay for this? How much did I pay for that? Is it going in and go out? Do I get my tax break and so on and so forth? We're very diligent about this. The idea of being accountable about what I'm spending, right? In a fiscal year, for example. The same idea happens that after this whole year, for example, or after this whole month, after this week, even after this day, or even at this very night, we go on our beds, we ask ourselves the question, how did I do this day? Right? How was I with the people around me? Did I do a good towards them? Did I have a concern? Did I have a good deed towards them, meaning was I of service to the people? Right? The Prophet ﷺ says, "Sayyidul qawm khadimuhum," that the master of a people are those that serve others. Right? To being a community servant. How was I towards my brother or my sister? Right? Those are the questions that we're asking in terms of self-reflection. Right? Because if we don't do that, we won't engage our levels of how we're moving. Right? Same thing with working out, for example. You want to see results, you want to see how far you're doing. You add more sets, you add more reps, and so on and so forth. Right? The same idea happens in terms of leveling up and moving forward. Even with Umar, it says, as tribute to him, حَاسِبُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ قَبْلَ أَن تُحَاسَبُوا. To take account of yourselves before you are accounted upon. Meaning that you have to check yourselves. I've said this many times, check yourselves before you wreck yourselves. Right? The idea is to really see yourselves and see what I need to fix as a person, as a student, as a sibling, as a parent, as a child. What are my relationships like before the day of accounting happens? That day of accounting is not a tax season. Similarly, it's the Yawm al-Hisab, Muhasabah, Yawm al-Hisab, the day of accounting. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be that accountant at that time. So we have to really check into ourselves and see what we're doing. Right? What do we need to work with? Okay. And the last thing, number 3, inshallah, and we'll close this first khutbah, is the idea of that first statement that we said by Ibn Ata'illah Secondary, which was min alamat al-najh, the signs of success at the end of things is to return to Allah in the beginning of things. Right? The idea of returning, the idea of inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, not for the dead, but for the living, for those that are here. Right? To return to Allah, to make tawbah, the idea of turning to Allah. But it is a struggle. It is a struggle because we're not always 100. We're not always up there in terms of always being in remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the nature of the heart. It's moving, it's turning. That's why there's a dua, Ya muqallib al-qulub. O turner of hearts. Thabbit qulubana ala deenik. Right? Grant our hearts this idea of stability, right, towards your religion, towards your way, Allah. And remember, when you make a mistake, when you see and you check your taxes, and you check, you reflect, and you see I've done wrong, is that the end? Am I doomed? That's not the case. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, when they hear, He says, قل يا عبادي الذين أسرفوا على أنفسهم لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله. Allah is talking to Allah is talking to the Prophet ﷺ. يا عبادي الذين أسرفوا على أنفسهم, my servants that have transgressed, that have too many vices, that have bad habits, that are going through many things in life, that have slipped, that have fell, that have transgressed over our own souls. لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله. Don't ever despair upon the mercy of Allah. إن الله يغفر الذنوب جميعا. That Allah forgives all deeds, all sins. إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. That He is the ever forgiving and the ever merciful. To realize that Allah's mercy is beyond how much that we can do in terms of slips, in terms of vices, how many times that we can fall. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us and have mercy upon us. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم. So just a recap in terms of moving forward, in terms of seeing how we deal with this, how we deal with life, how we move forward in terms of a reflection, in terms of what this new year can bring. And I'll end it as well with a quote that I a saying that I really like, inshallah, after the recap. The first was muraqabah, to take awareness of what we're doing. Right? To be self-aware of how we're moving in life. To be aware of that, right? Number two is muhasabah. Muhasabah is to take account. Take account before we are being taken accounted for. Right? The saying, it says, صَلُّوا قَبْلَ أَن تُصَلَّى عَلَيْهِ. Pray before you are prayed upon. Right? Meaning the janazah prayer, meaning our final prayer which we're being prayed upon. It's a reminder for us to really step our game up, right? How are we doing this life? Work with that. And tawbah. The last and final thing is tawbah, is to really return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to really start with that. Because usually what happens, unfortunately, is that we turn to Allah at the final gasps of life when we really need it. And so the idea for tawbah is to really need it in all states, in all moments. To always be in that state of desperation. That's the state of the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that last saying, I'll conclude, is an Egyptian saying, كُلُّ عَامُ وَأَنْتَمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَقْرَبُ. Right? You know, people usually say Happy New Year's, and so on and so forth. That Arabic saying in the Egyptian society, they say, may every year bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May every year bring us closer to the divine reality. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow every year that to bring us near and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closer to us than the jugular vein. It's the matter of us moving towards. Who moved in the first place? Right? Who moved in the first place? Was it Allah that moved, or was it us? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to reset and re-engage and to reorient our way towards the divine presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us, to have mercy upon us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on our families and our communities. We ask Allah to instill within us love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, love for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, love for our families, love for our communities, love for our parents, love for our siblings, love for our relatives. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow love to be around this community of Al-Alameen. We ask Allah to forgive us and to forgive our parents and our grandparents. ربنا آتنا رب اغفر لنا ذنوبنا والوالدي وارحمهم كما ربونا صغارا. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وأقيموا الصلاة. Have the presence of Allah within your hearts, and the salatu and the rahmah and the nasir Allahu Akbar. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر.
الله.
سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Sami Allah Muhammad. Salat subuh masih jam 6. Fajar prayer still 6 o'clock in the morning. Come early so you can park inside the masjid. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jumaah Mubarak.